Welcome back to hour number 2 of the Gary Sutton Show, the Tuesday morning edition here on WSBA. Great day outside, except it'll be a little hot out there, but that's all right. Bowe Bergdahl's been off the front page for the last few days with the Iraq situation going on. It just seems like every day something new is blossoming out there. And, of course, we have the mass attack almost at the border of all these kids coming in. And what do we do with those and from other countries? With us this morning is a guy who knows a little something about it. Brian is the attorney who specializes in military cases, and he joins us here on the Gary Sutton Show. Good morning, Brian. Great to have you on the show.
Hey, Gary. Thanks for having me.
Brian, Bowe Bergdahl returned home last week, obviously. He's got a long road ahead right now. What's the process he's going through right now before he even gets to a point where we start to question maybe, how he left his unit and what happened during the 5 years and so forth?
His process is moving forward at this point. He's still undergoing the reintegration process, and that involves medical and mental health, probably, psychological issues that he's dealing with. And that literally is going to take just as long as it needs to take. At some point, he will be cleared for questioning on certain issues. And you probably are also aware that, at least as of yesterday, the Army has assigned a major general to handle the administrative investigation into what happened, and that may end up leading to a criminal investigation.
Yeah, I mean, from what you're a guy who specializes in these kind of cases, military cases, that is. What kind of stuff do they do when they repatriate? I'm sure they debrief you a little bit on what happened over the 5 years. That's got to be one of the first things. But they also worry, I guess, about where's your mental state at this particular point? I mean, we don't know what all this guy went through over the 5 years, right?
That's exactly right. There's so much about this story that we just don't know. And I suspect there's a great deal about it that even the government doesn't know, although they certainly know a lot more than we do at this point. It's going to unfold, and I really think that we're going to be talking about this story, even a year from now as this thing goes forward.
Is it wise right now? You know what the political thoughts are in this country, that everybody's waiting for a cover-up and that kind of thing. At least a lot of people are out there. You hear it on the street. That it would be nice to see him or something like that. But it seems to me that, again, we still are at a point where I think in thinking about any soldier who's going through this, maybe keeping him in seclusion is good. And yet at the same time, what's an appropriate time to have him come out there where you can actually talk to him?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, but all of those concerns have to take a back seat to his rehabilitation, and you can't forget, even though we don't know much of the specifics about the circumstances under which he left, and they're certainly, what we're hearing indicates that it's probably not very good information there, but it's undisputed that he's been in their custody for 5 years, and we're talking about a pretty brutal enemy.
And when you talk about not very good information, you talk about the fact he might be a deserter, right?
Well, exactly. I mean, we're hearing from people who were there, his squad mates, people there at the base who knew him in 2009 and can give us really good evidence about the circumstances of his departure. And it's not looking good. I mean, we can certainly just acknowledge that truth, but we've got to let the guy heal. We've got to let him get right, and then this process is going to go forward.
Brian, the one concern, again, that we have, and again, I think I know what your answer is on this, that, he's going to be I don't know, indoctrinated a little bit during that time to make sure he has the right answers when he comes out that would support what the administration's done. But I guess, again, you would come back and say, yeah, but let's give the benefit of the doubt and make sure that we think that, honestly, this thing is being taken care of in the right way.
Exactly. We have to start and even end at this point with the realization that under our Constitution, he's innocent until proven guilty.
Right.
So that's a basic core truth. Whether or not he is being, as you say, indoctrinated, I certainly don't think we can rule that out. And I do think that whatever criminal consequences may come from this, they're going to be heavily politically driven.
Yeah.
In other words, if the administration doesn't want a prosecution, then there will be no prosecution.
When you look at this right now, and one final question on that before I move on, that is there somebody there that's kind of, what do I want to say, a quality control person who's taking notes, who's making sure that this kind of thing does not happen by the administration? Again, a lot of us don't really have a lot of trust in the administration right now.
That's true. I don't know. I'd like to hope that there would be men of honor and integrity who are just going to call balls and strikes when they see them.
Yeah, amen.
I wish I could be 100% confident about that, but unfortunately, in my practice, I see too many examples where that's just not the case.
You have handled a number of military cases, and when you look at the military cases, how are they different from, let's say, a regular civil or even criminal case that might come across a lawyer's desk?
The first thing you have to realize about military justice is it's all criminal law. The military does not have a mechanism for, what would be the equivalent of our civil suits where people are fighting over money and things like that. So military justice is disciplinary in nature. It's judicial in nature. Once you get into an actual trial where you're there and sitting in the desk in front of the judge and calling witnesses, it's very similar to what you would see in a civilian criminal trial, but a lot of the mechanisms to get there are very, very different.
Brian, have you had to deal with a case maybe similar to Sergeant Bergdahl's case in the past?
I have never dealt with somebody who was a former POW or detainee and was facing allegations that they had left of their own accord. Certainly when I was on active duty, I handled many unauthorized absence cases, and that's the template for that is kind of, somebody is supposed to report for a working party on Friday and they decide, no, I want to spend the weekend in Tijuana, and then they kind of do that and come back on Monday. That's the kind of thing in the civilian world that's not even a crime. I mean, you might get fired from your job, but you're not going to be prosecuted. The Bergdahl situation has the potential to certainly be very different, and that is if the government can prove that when he left, he had the intent to remain away permanently, then they literally can charge him and seek the death penalty for this case.
Wow. Don't anticipate that's probably going to happen, do you?
No, I really don't. I really don't.
Now, from what we know about the case so far, he left, and this is kind of fact, that he left his uniform behind, he left his gun behind, and he went out, I guess, in civilian clothes and was seen by some people, so you're left with that to start with. That doesn't sound real good out of the starting gate, does it?
No. I mean, everything that we're hearing, even though we can't conclusively say that it's true, it paints a very, very disturbing picture of what was going on with that young man.
When you look at, this kind of case, what are the things that, as you heard this kind of unraveling a little bit before the public, what were some of the things that came across your mind, Brian?
The first thing I thought, well, actually, the very first thing I thought when I heard about the prisoner swap is, we've now sent this terrible message to our enemies that if you take one of our guys, you can get 5 of yours back in return.
Okay.
And I'm very concerned about the impact that may have on the honorable men and women who are serving out there under our flag. From a legal standpoint, the first thing I thought was from the perspective of defending Bergdahl, he needs a lawyer, and he needs a lawyer right away.
Yeah.
And had I been called on that case, the first thing I would have done is sought a grant of immunity for him, where we could take this entire discussion of prosecution for what he may or may not have done off the table and open his mind up to whatever questions that they want to ask him. I understand from the government's perspective, they don't want to do that. They want to be able to have their cake and eat it too, and I'm sure he has not seen counsel.
Right. So it's an interesting statement you make. So you would have put immunity on the table. I'm sure your name would have been used in a lot of different ways around the country if you'd have done that. And yet at the same time, what would be the purpose of that? Take us inside that thinking.
Well, the thinking is that, whoever my client is, they have 100% of my loyalty.
Right.
And what I want to accomplish for them is whatever is in their best interest. And it's never in someone's best interest for the government to prosecute them.
Absolutely, yeah.
Something that can be kind of hard for people to accept is that attitude persists whether somebody is guilty or innocent or somewhere in between. Everybody has a right to a defense, and everybody has a right to the best defense that they can have. So that would have been the first thing that I would have tried to do to protect him, is to try to short-circuit the entire prosecution process, and I doubt that that's been done.
We're talking with Brian, an attorney who specializes in military cases. So you walk into this case now, once we get a lawyer on this, the lawyer's going to walk into the case now kind of a while after the fact. What kind of problems could they potentially face then?
The biggest problem that we normally face in all kinds of situations is somebody who is read their rights by law enforcement. Law enforcement's very good at getting people to waive their rights, and a lot of people think that, they can just kind of say anything they want to law enforcement and it's not going to be used against them, but it absolutely is. So when you hear on TV cop shows, anything you say can and will be used against you, that's absolutely right. And it can't be used to help you. In other words, the government can use your statements against you, but I, as your defense attorney, could not use your statements in your own favor.
So one would assume right now, Brian, that as he's getting debriefed and repatriated and all these different words we're hearing, someone's probably taking notes along the way, aren't they?
I would hope so. And like I said, I would hope that whatever is going on with him, whatever's happening in interrogations or anything like that, I hope that it is being honestly and thoroughly and dispassionately and nonpartisanly transcribed.
I hear some doubt in your voice as you're saying that. I hear some doubt in your voice. Am I misreading?
No, you're not misreading, because, you know, I wish I could say you were. I wish I could say that we can trust our government, and I wish I could say that we can trust law enforcement to always do what is in accordance with the objective truth. And I don't want to sound like a shill here, but I can just tell you from long experience that that's just not the case. And
you know, the other part, I hope they're not sending the people that kept Lois Lerner's emails in there to help, because that's a bad joke. Forgive me. But you know, when you serve as a lawyer, and I've talked to lawyers who serve in regular civil and regular criminal law, they say, how do you support your client? It's got to be hard sometimes, I would think, for a lawyer, in your particular case, a military lawyer, where you go, all right, things don't look too good for this. How do you go out and support a guy like that? You know, the national thought about this guy right now, generally, I would say, from what I've heard, is not that good, although many have said, you know, give him a stay in court, he's innocent until proven guilty. And yet in America, I don't think we really believe that sometimes. I think we more believe you're guilty until proven innocent in practice. How do you go about doing that when maybe you have some doubts yourself as a lawyer? I guess maybe you just wouldn't take the case, but suppose you get into the case and then some doubts develop. How do you deal with that?
And bottom line, if I was not conflicted out for some reason, I would take that case.
Yeah.
You remember how we all felt about Richard Jewell, the suspected Olympic Park bomber?
Yeah.
You know, he was innocent. And he was innocent, but yet anybody, before the truth really came out, anybody would have happily drawn and quartered that poor man. He didn't do anything wrong.
Right.
We can see from the exonerations of death row inmates who are cleared by DNA years later. Our system, as good as it is, it absolutely is subject to human frailty, and it does not always get everything right. For somebody like Sergeant Bergdahl, we appear to have heard from these people who have pretty good perspective and pretty good evidence that he has done a bad thing. But we don't know that.
Right.
We just don't know that. And even if he had done exactly what everybody seems to believe that he has done, he's still entitled to a defense. Because if we don't give him a defense, we are eroding the right that we all have to a defense when we're sitting in that chair.
Brian, when we come back, I want to ask you finally the process. Once that starts, what will happen with the military court? I think a lot of people are intrigued by that. We're going to come right back with you. A short break. Brian Bouffard with us here on the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA. He'll be right back after this.
Now you can listen to us on your HD radio at 96.1 HD2. News Radio 910 WSBA.
Welcome back to the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA with Brian Bouffard, as an attorney who specializes in military cases, as we talk about what Bowe Bergdahl might look forward to once he's done with his rehab part. Brian, you know, one of the things I've kind of left here for the last few moments is, obviously, it's a time for, you know, kind of getting back on your feet. Obviously, it's a time for getting the well-being back. Obviously, it's time for psychiatric and even maybe physical care at this particular point. We don't know all that. It's been very quiet. But once all of that is done, whatever time period that takes, and you laid out, it might be a very long time before we get to that. Give us the step-by-step procedure that you go through when you have a military tribunal, if it even gets to that point.
Well, right now, as of just yesterday, the Army has assigned a major general. His name is Kenneth Dahl, D-A-H-L.
Right.
He has been assigned to do what the Army calls a 15-6 investigation. And that is not a criminal investigation, although they can sometimes lead to one. It's essentially a fact-finding inquiry. And what he's going to do is he's going to re-interview all the folks down there at the base who were around him when he left in 2009. He's going to go over all the evidence that apparently the government has with emails that Sergeant Bergdahl may have sent, things like that. He will not be allowed to attempt to interview Sergeant Bergdahl until Sergeant Bergdahl is cleared by the medical folks and the integration team and says, you know, he's ready to be interviewed. And then it's up to him whether he will agree to an interview.
Let me ask you a question that you've got these guys that came out in the last week. There were like 6 of them around, or last 2 weeks really, who were around talking about this. Some of them had, signed papers that said they were supposed to kind of have a gag order on this. And yet a lot of them have said, when the president came out with the whole Rose Garden thing, this was not something they've not been talking about for 5 years. This happened 5 years ago, and many of them are out there, and people are saying, how can you ignore that? Where does that fit in? If you signed a gag order and now you come out and you talk about it individually, does that Does that prejudice the case at all? Is it somehow not going to be included in the case later on? How does that work?
You know, I don't think in my career I have ever seen a situation where soldiers have been given a gag order.
Yeah.
And I have heard about this. I'm aware that that's being reported. I would love to see the actual document that details why that is.
Right.
The only thing that really jumps out at me as something that's plausible is if there were issues involving classified information. I mean, obviously,
sure.
You know, you don't even need to give somebody a gag order to keep them from talking about classified information. You can be prosecuted for that. But if it's just hey, you know, this is, you know, potentially embarrassing, that's another story. I really would like to see those documents. Now, does that have any real effect in a court-martial? Probably not.
Brian, under the lead-in of what if, suppose you get to a point where you have, I guess, a court-martial, right? And you get in there. Tell us the steps that goes through in terms of getting a jury, in terms of how that works. You said it's a lot like a regular case, and we've seen that. Anybody who watched A Few Good Men has seen the court-martial go about. I'm not sure that's exactly right, but, you know, how does that all work?
I'll kind of answer your question this way. F. Lee Bailey, who was one of the O.J. Simpson jurors, he's a former Marine, and he was asked about the difference between the military justice system and the civilian justice system, and he said, if I have an innocent client, I would much rather him be tried by a court-martial than by a civilian jury.
Why so?
If I had a guilty client, I would much rather have him tried by a civilian jury. And in my experience, I've tried many cases in both arenas, and I agree with that. We typically have a much smarter jury, and when I say smarter, I mean more experienced and more educated. They're all employed, usually all military officers, sometimes military enlisted folks in certain circumstances as well. They're very good at seeing through BS to the truth. And as a defense attorney, you know, I'm concerned, obviously, about the fact that most people who join the military tend to be kind of rigid, sort of law and order type people. But on the other hand, they are also very used to following orders. And so when a judge tells them, if you have a reasonable doubt, you will find him not guilty, they can often follow that order a lot better than a corresponding civilian jury trying to, you know, pick its way through reasonable doubt.
So how are they chosen? I mean, is it the same way that we choose jurors in a regular court?
Well, unfortunately, that is, in my opinion, the absolute worst part of the military justice system. And that is, there is a player in the system called the convening authority. The convening authority is usually a senior officer, a general who's in command. He's the one who has decided that whatever this set of facts is, it deserves a court-martial. So he's the one who, honestly, he's supposed to be a neutral party, but realistically, he's the one who thinks that the accused did it. He personally gets to select the panel of jurors to hear that case.
Wow. That's a rough one.
And it is. And in my opinion, it's the absolute worst part of our system and the part that should make the public kind of wonder if it's fair. Both sides get to obviously do a jury selection and try to ferret out bias in those folks. At the end of the day, can a convening authority pack a court with people who he thinks are going to rule his way? Yes, he can. And it's happened in the past, and that's something that we always have to be pretty vigilant about.
Brian, I've really enjoyed talking with you this morning. You've given me a lot of insights I did not know about. I hope if things come to pass, we can call you again and tap on your resources.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Brian, thank you so much, and thank you for your service to the country, too. We totally appreciate it. Thank you. Brian with us this morning, who is an attorney who specializes in military cases, laying out what could happen down the road here for Bowe Bergdahl once he is kind of rehabbed at the place he's staying right now. Here on the Gary Sutton Show at 11:35. Right now, it's 1:30.